Welcome to the One Big Thing podcast. I'm your host, Steve Campbell. This is going to be an incredible conversation today. I have retired Army Sergeant Rick Yarosh, who really, from where I grew up in upstate New York, is a hometown hero in many ways. You are going to hear from him today. He is actually the second veteran I've had on the show. Did have the pleasure of interviewing twice a 20-year Army veteran ranger in J.C. Glick. But Rick Yarosh is somebody that has made a tremendous impact on the lives of those that he's come across as a veteran. If you get a chance, you can listen, obviously, to the One Big Thing. So if you're here to champion Rick, welcome. I hope that as the host of the show, this is not your last stop. But I'm also a big component of we do offer a visual for this today. So if you want to get onto YouTube, and watch Rick and I go back and forth, I think that it will really inspire you through his story. And I don't want to steal too much of his thunder as we get into it today. But Rick, for those that may not know you, welcome to the One Big Thing podcast. I'm really excited about this conversation today. But for those that don't know you, do you want to give us a high-level overview of who you are?
Sure. So first off, thanks for having me on, Steve. And I truly do appreciate, you said hometown hero. I've never once considered myself a hero, as most people know that military vets don't really do that. But we do truly appreciate it when other people do consider us that. So I do appreciate you saying that. So I'm 41 years old today, and I am, 18 years old, graduating from Windsor Central High School in upstate New York, not knowing what I wanted to do with my life, working odd jobs, stuff like that. Became a soldier after figuring out I needed some kind of push in my life. I knew the Army would give me that, and they did. In the Army, I learned some amazing things, and got injured, as we'll get into, and moved back home to upstate New York, which some people question, like, why would you move back to upstate New York? Look at that weather. Like, you could have stayed in Texas, because that's where I had my recovery. But I moved back home, and I met my amazing wife, Amy. I have my two beautiful daughters, Tenley and Grace. And truly, it's just amazing to feel where I'm at 17 years later after I was injured, after really my life was extremely changed.
Yeah, and I think, to Amy and to the girls, thanks for giving us the space to interview Dad. And, I know he's going to make you proud. But, for those that may not be tuning into the visual, obviously, Rick, you're not only a veteran, but you were also injured in combat. And so for those who may never experienced anybody to the degree of the severity of your injuries, it might be shocking. And I know that even leading up to this show today, I said, hey, guess who Daddy gets to interview today? Because my kids love playing soldier. They love playing and, they love the military. Their grandfather was in the Vietnam War, but they don't always understand the totality of war and what it can mean. And so, most of the veterans that they know are living and they came back the way they went in, or we've talked about, unfortunately, that people die in war. But it's hard for a young kid to conceptualize that. But as we were leading up to this conversation today, and I showed them kind of pictures of what you went through, they had lots of questions. And so for those that have never been exposed to anybody who's ever been seriously injured in combat before, I hope that, again, Rick's story will inspire you, because you're so inspirational to all of us, because you haven't, from what I've seen, allowed what happened to you to really define who you are. It's actually become a launching pad for you to probably connect with way more people. So to talk about kind of, where we are today and the opportunities that you have, I think it stems back from, what happened to you when you were in Iraq. I mean, you share as much as you possibly want to, but for those that don't know your story, I mean, kind of catch us up on, kind of what happened and where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I obviously look incredibly different. I walk into a building full of people. I'm the one person that's looked at for a lot longer than the other people. And, 17 years after this all happened, I'm used to that. And I'll tell you right now that I'm more comfortable with the way I look today than the way I looked 18 years ago before I got injured. I got no one to compete with anymore. Like, in this world that we live in our normal selves, we compete with everybody all the time on everything. And I'm not competing against anybody anymore. And it feels amazing when you free yourself from that. So I'm extremely comfortable with who I am. And I mean, my hands, like, obviously extremely different. Like, things that I didn't struggle with before, I obviously struggle with now, 18 years later. But still, I'm more comfortable today with who I am than I was 18 years ago. So yeah, let's get into this story of what happened. So 17 years ago, September 1st, 2006, when I was deployed in Iraq. I was actually 9 months into a deployment in Iraq. And I was on a patrol on a road I had been on many times before in a vehicle called a Bradley, basically a small tank. That day was different than most other days because this day there was an IED that was buried under the road. And my Bradley ran over it and it exploded. Went through the bottom of my vehicle up into the turret where I was sitting, but also that's where we have our fuel tank. And yeah, it's about 168 gallons of fuel that we have, and we fill up every single time we went out on a mission. So it was a full tank of fuel, covering myself, covering my buddies, covering the vehicle in fuel, and instantly on fire. As soon as I was on fire, the first thing I knew to do was to get out of the vehicle. I had to get out before I could think of anything else. I can't think of stop, drop, and roll yet. I got to think of what's happening in that moment. First thing, get out of the vehicle. So I climbed to the top, and I had the hatch above me open that day. I don't leave that hatch open, ever. It's because we're not supposed to. Like when we climb in, we close the hatch so that if we ever got hit with chemicals couldn't get into the vehicle. But that day, I left it open. I mean, I just think about that and how lucky and how truly blessed I am. Thank God I left that hatch open. Because if I didn't, with all that smoke and all that fire, the chaos of that moment, like, I wouldn't have found the lever above my head to hit to unlock the cover. So I didn't have to worry about that because I left it open. I climbed through the top. Then once I got to the top, the next thing I knew I had to do was I had to get to the ground. But there were two big problems with that. First of all, it was 10 feet off of the ground. So I was going to have to jump 10 feet to the ground. Big problem. Bigger problem, I couldn't see. And I couldn't see because my face was on fire. I mean, that's why I look so incredibly handsome today, is because my face was on fire. But my face was on fire. Fire was covering my eyes. And I knew I had to jump. Didn't matter that I was blind in that moment. So I did jump. And I did make it to the ground. I took that leap of faith. I did make it to the ground. I broke my leg when I landed, though. And that's actually how I ended up with an amputation of my leg below my knee, my right leg. So I'm out of the vehicle. I'm off of the vehicle. Now I got to put the fire out. And I did what I was taught to do when I was 4 or 5 years old. Stop, drop, and roll. I mean, we all know that one. That's what I did. And that's when I found out that I'm sure it works if your shirt is on fire or something like that, but not when your entire body is engulfed in flames. I could not put the fire out. And that's when I did something that I regret. It's honestly the biggest regret of my entire life, because that's when I just gave up. Laid on my back, stared up into the sky, and just accepted that God was going to take me, that it was over. It was done. Stop, drop, and roll didn't work. That's what I was taught to do. I couldn't stand up and run. My leg was broken. Even if I could, where was I going? My face was on fire. I couldn't see anything. So I probably had 10 more seconds to live. And I was like, this is it. It's over. And biggest regret of my life. Because I know today, I don't care how hard things get in my life, I will fight to the very end. There will never be no give up in me ever again. But that day I did. I lost something really important that day. It's something we all carry with us every day of our lives, and that's hope. I gave up hope. Truly, I felt hopeless. And to me today, hope stands for hold on, possibilities exist. Hold on, possibilities exist. And, you know, when you're first dealing with really difficult, really awful things, it's hard to see all the possibilities that exist, you know, later on down the road, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. But if you hold on, which also equals being patient, if you hold on long enough, you're going to find out that there are amazing possibilities that exist for your future. Now, that's what I gave up that day. I was giving up on those possibilities that existed. But thankfully, when I had given up, it was only for a few seconds. And I ended up rolling in one direction. No idea which direction that was in, because I could have been rolling right back to that Bradley. I had no idea which direction I was going. But I was thankfully rolling away from it. And I ended up rolling down a hill and into a canal that was there. And I still think about that day. You know, whenever I struggle with my faith, I can go right back to that moment right there, because I told you that I gave up. I lost hope. I didn't get hope back all of a sudden and roll. I believe that God pushed me into that canal to give me that hope, Like, he was the hope that gave me the opportunity to roll into that canal and save my life, put the fire out that water did. Eventually, a couple of my friends found me in the canal, and one of them grabbed my legs, and that was one of the first times that I felt true pain, because my leg was broken. And then my other buddy grabbed my arms. Actually, I can remember he grabbed my eye bass first, my body armor, and as soon as he grabbed that, because of the fire, it just ripped right through. So he grabbed under my arms, and then they carried me out of the canal, where the helicopters would pick us up about 30 minutes later. But when I got to the top, that's when it all started to sink in. Like, I could see how bad my injuries were, and this is a tough one for people to hear, I know, but it's just reality. It's my reality. I saw how bad my hands were burned, and that's because my palms were hanging off my fingertips. Something called degloving. Yeah, it was hard for me to see that, and I could see how bad my face was burnt. And it's not because I had a mirror; it's because it was hanging from my chin. Like, in that moment, first of all, I didn't know if I would live. I knew that my injuries were bad enough I might not. But if I did, man, life was going to be different. Like, everything was about to change for me.
But for those who don't know you, I'm sure that humor has had to become a part of your life, right? Because when you say you're handsome, like, dude, you're such a blessing to me because I know what you went through. But I'm sure there has to be a de-escalation, a de-arming for when you meet, people that have never seen somebody in a state that you have. So even just listening, it's hard not to get emotional because I'm just thinking about your story and maybe the people that are out there today that have never served in that capacity or been through what you've been through, but their story still matters, and they may be without hope. They might be depressed. They might have everything in life they've ever wanted, kids, marriage, the job of their dreams, and yet they're left hopeless. Something is missing for them. And as I listen to you, if anybody ever had a right to be angry and to be mad and to be justified, right? Listening to your story and what you went through. I mean, any human would say, Rick, it's okay to go the other, but you never really have in all the times I've ever heard you speak. And I think you're such a testament to what you just shared and how, quickly you can go back to that moment in time, how many people you're going to help. Because I know we want to get into a lot today. You're a dad and a husband. Like, yes, that was a defining part of your life in many ways, but you haven't allowed it to define you. Right. And I think maybe it's a fascinating kind of idea, just thinking on the spot, is that was something Suzanne Thompson and I talked about, is the difference between time and timing. Right. And sometimes we misdiagnose the two. Like, there is a timing to life and how we do things, but time is a resource. And I think sometimes we cross that. I think for you, you had this defining moment, but it didn't define you. And so it's like, how do all of us cope with that as husbands, as wives, as coworkers, as brothers, as sisters? That whether you've been dealt a bad hand, something happened, like, that can be a defining moment, but it doesn't have to define you as a person, right? It just gives you context for something that, whether it was tragic or a high watermark, like, what do you do with it? And I think what's incredible about your story, and it's maybe just sometimes what's hard for us to cope with too as people, is like, the hatch was open that day. Like, why? Like, that's the thing that when you recall your story, I'm sure you probably talk about quite a bit, that the hatch was open. And I think sometimes for us, like, too, when we go through things, there's little unexpected blessings or like things that happen that in the moment is probably frustrating. Like, we forgot to do that. But when you actually look back, it's like, dude, that was probably the thing that saved my life. And so, for you, I know you've talked, over the last, almost 10, 15 years in schools and with people. Has there been anything that, as you've gone through talking with people, like, I'm sure your story resonates so deeply with people that it's hard not to get emotional, because it's hard for any of us to step into your shoes, but as a human, we just like, man, I feel for what you went through. But when you do these speaking events, are there people that come up to you that share things with you that you're like, man, I can't believe, like, people are dealing with that, because your physical extremities are like, there's no hiding from it. But people that don't have physical extremities have emotional scars, mental things that you can't see. unless they act out. And then it's like, geez, what's going on with that person? So like, as you interact with people every single day, is it ever shocking to you what people open up and share with you that maybe you never assumed when you started doing these events?
I think I think what's shocking to me is that what people deal with.
Hmm.
Like not only them sharing what they deal with, but what they truly deal with. Like I speak to elementary, middle, high schoolers, and when I'm talking to middle and high schoolers, like I'm telling them my story, and they can't relate to my story because they've never been on fire. Like the only I know very few people that could relate exactly with my story, but they can relate with hopelessness.
Hmm.
And it's unbelievable to hear some of the stories that I hear from middle school kids. I would never put what happened to me on a level with another person. That's not I will never say, oh, my injury was way worse than what you ever went through, or my injury was way less than what you ever went through. That's not up to me. That's how you handle it and how you deal with it. Especially when I'm talking to a 13-year-old who's been through, I've heard some of the most awful stories that you couldn't even put on camera.
Right.
Like it's amazing to hear those stories from those students. And I would say, oh my gosh, how the heck could you get through something like that?
Hmm.
Well, you have to find hope in it. Like you said, in the beginning, I was angry in the beginning. I was justified. Like all these things that you had said, I'm not. I was in the beginning, and I think we're allowed to be.
Hmm.
When something first happens, like it's a natural reaction to get angry, to feel like you need revenge, to feel like whatever. But if you live like that for too long, it's dangerous. And today, I tell people that what happened to me, and I don't expect anyone else to look at it exactly the same way, but I tell people that what happened to me was the best thing that ever happened to me. If I don't look at it that way, if I don't find something amazing that came out of what happened, my life isn't good. I'm not in school speaking. So I'm in school speaking because of what happened.
Hmm.
I met my wife because of what happened. I have my 2 daughters because I got injured. Like all of those things happened in my life because of what most people would say is an awful day, the worst thing that could ever happen to somebody. But I found amazing things that came out of that day, and I wouldn't have them today. And when I'm talking to students, I say, you know what? How can I say I have those things and then also say that that was the worst thing that ever happened to me? Or how could I say that that's the day that my life was ruined? How can I say that? And then I say, can I say that? And they're like, no, you can't. But then they're like, oh, wait a minute. Yes, you can. Because we have free will. We can do what we want. We choose how we feel. And the only one that's going to tell me that my life is ruined or not is me. I don't want my life to be ruined. No one can ruin my life. Can people do really bad things to me, hurt my family? They can. But in the end, it's up to me whether my life is ruined or not. So when I'm talking to these students who I know who have been through some really, really difficult, really, really awful things, people that have been through some really difficult, really awful things, you gotta find something good that came out of those things. And I guarantee you can if you choose to look at it a little different. We all know that we can't change the past. I can't change what happened that day, but I can change how I looked at it. And it took me a little longer than I would have liked to, about 5 years, to really recognize that amazing things were happening around me. But there were all these moments that were giving me hope. A little girl in a restaurant who was scared of me, and I could see it. And every kid was scared of me. And that was probably the hardest part of my recovery, was the fact that children saw me as a monster. Like, you describe me to a kid. You write down all of these things. You don't say man, you don't say human. You just write down the way I look. And a kid's going to draw a monster in their head. That's what is going to happen. So when a little kid sees me, they see me as that monster. But that little girl in the restaurant that saw me that day as a monster, I could see it in her eyes that she saw it that way. Her grandfather told her to come over and say hello to me. She didn't want to, and I got that. I totally understood it. I didn't want her to either. I knew how it would end. She came over, got about halfway over to me. I said, hey, how you doing? As nicely as I could. I didn't want her to come all the way over. And when I said that, she turned around and ran back to her grandpa as fast as she could. Like, and at that moment, my recovery is just like, you know what, Rick, deal with it, figure it out. Like, this is going to be your deal forever. Kids are always going to be afraid of you. You're always going to look different. Just deal with it. But that little girl, she got back to her grandpa and she said, Grandpa, he's really nice. And that's not what I thought she was going to say. And I'll tell you right now, that's what hope looks like. Now, you don't always pick it out as hope,
Yeah.
but it is. She changed my life forever. And I probably had moments before that. I believe that God put her in my path that day. And I believe God put many other people in my path before that day. I just didn't see it. My eyes weren't open. All I could see was the smoke that was still in front of my face that I was having a hard time clearing away so that I could see the amazing things that were going on around me. But when you clear that smoke, once you start seeing the amazing things, it's hard to miss them. And that's where I'm at today. I have bad moments, but they're only moments because I don't allow myself to fall into the trap that can turn into a day or a week. I look around and I see all the beautiful things around me when I'm in that moment of difficulty, of adversity.
Well, even just sharing that story, Rick, I think is going to help a lot of people too, because like it feels like today, and I want to come back to your story here in a second, but in society, like we're almost told to like look away at people's differences, but yet like
Yeah,
champion them at the same time. And I would imagine that, and I'm not saying like society's gotten soft, but we've also done a disadvantage to all of our differences, which make us human, whether we were born certain ways or whether we've experienced life. Like have you ever experienced like in your world, like it's almost like society would want us to feel bad and like not like look away because we don't want to draw attention to you. Like does that like infuriate you because you're still Rick Yarosh, like you're still like a person, and it's like you're championing now a message for so many people. Like what has that experience been like, trying to like the cultural clash of kind of what's happening for like not necessarily just accepting or celebrating differences, but just like with that little girl, like you bridged a gap for her that probably is going to become a defining moment for her, that she's going to remember the guy she met at the restaurant that looked completely different from her. And he was not a monster. Like he was a
right.
nice guy. Like you bridged that gap for her. So like, what has that experience kind of been like because of how striking physically different like you are, which immediately alienates a lot of people because they're like, how do I, like, how do I even approach Rick? Like, do I hug him? Do I shake his hand? Like, do I acknowledge what's happened to him? Do I
Yeah.
act like nothing's happened to him and like just, kind of act like I don't see like that you've been through stuff? So like,
Stare into his nose holes.
because it's very easy for us to like say what we are is almost like you wouldn't have to come up to me and be like, hey, I'm a burn victim, for me to be like, oh, okay, I guess I didn't know that. Like, you're just Rick. And by loving Rick, like I get to know you and your story. But like in society, these cultural clashes, like what has that kind of been for you? How have you worked through that? And like, I don't know, any life lessons you've learned going through it?
Yeah, it could be infuriating if I allowed it to be, but again, that's
Well, I
that's
love
a
you.
choice. Yeah, that's why I just don't choose that. But I also the reason I don't choose it is because I also understand it. Like culture is a hard thing to change, and when you're in a culture of something, it's just like you kind of have to accept it. Now you got to work around things and make things fit the right way. But culture's culture, and so I understand why parents will tell their kid, "Hey, hey, hey, stop staring at him. Like, don't do that." Well, that kid's curious. He wants to know what happened to that guy, just like you do. And you're just looking out of the corner of your eye and you're telling your kid to stop. I love when a parent palms their kid's face because they're like, don't look at him. And that's when I see that happen, I'll walk right up to him and I'll say, hey, buddy, or, how you doing? And I'll talk to the little kid. I won't even look at the parent. And because but I don't blame that parent. I absolutely do not blame that parent. That's their world, and they're trying to not only protect their kid, they're trying to protect me. They don't want to hurt Rick. Well, you're not going to hurt Rick. Like, I speak in middle schools for a living. You can't hurt me. Those are the most judgmental people in the world, middle schoolers. That's what I always tell them. I was like, do you think I'd be in this room with you right now if I wasn't comfortable with who I was? Not a chance. But that's just it. Becoming comfortable with who you are. And again, it takes time to do all of these things. Like, yeah, that culture is the way it is, but that doesn't mean I always have to fit every single piece of that culture. And I can break the mold a little bit by approaching those families and talking to them. I didn't have that ability early on, and I did get infuriated. Like, why is everyone staring at me? Why do kids see me as a monster? Okay, well, let me just understand it. Okay, oh, I know why everybody's staring at me. I know why kids can see me as a monster. I mean, it's obvious. But now I got to figure out how to change that. And when I go into an elementary school, you should see it. It's amazing. I walk into that room and they're like, oh my gosh, like what the heck is that? Like, that's not a human being. Is he wearing a mask? Is he a monster? And I can see the kids in the room who are just not sure how to handle it. And I can even see the kids that are afraid. You see the fear. And when I see them, they are my goal. I'm going to make them comfortable within the next 10 minutes that I'm talking to them. I'm going to make them comfortable. I talk about my dog Amos, my service dog. And all of a sudden at the end, I can see the change. And a lot of times the change comes instantly when I come out and I say, good morning or good afternoon. And they hear my voice and they're like, oh, that's definitely not how I thought a monster would sound. And maybe it's not a monster. And then I get to do some Q&A sessions with the little kids. And by the end of the session with the kindergartners, they're telling me how old their mom is and their dad and their dogs. And like, it's just they're comfortable. So if you don't force yourself into difficult situations, that difficult situation that you see as a difficult situation will always be a difficult situation. So I forced myself into a place where it was really hard. I didn't like talking to little kids in the beginning. I wouldn't do it. But that was my fault. That was nobody else's. I had to change who I was to make myself comfortable. And here I am today, about 2 million students I've talked to over the past, 12, 13, 14 years. And I had to force myself to feel uncomfortable to do that. It's the only way to become comfortable in this world is to make yourself uncomfortable. It's the only way to be comfortable.
Well, I think you're doing an incredible job because it just feels like as adults, we're trying to navigate political correctness, like to a point that it's almost like ruin the human connection. Because, like you said, like if I was with my kids, what is proper protocol if I'm in the grocery store and I see a Rick Yarosh who I don't know? If is it really like look away, or is it like, hey, like, because I don't, if I didn't know you from the next person, it's like, are you approachable? Are you actually like who you say you are? But trying to bridge those gaps, trying to navigate like workplace culture as an adult, and just like, dude, I just want to love you because you're a human. Like, not like you don't have to start our conversation by saying like, hi, I'm Rick. I was in the military. I was burned really bad. So I just wanted you to know that. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, like, what do we do with that? Oh, okay. Is that
right.
like you're using that defining moment to define you then? And I think that's maybe where the struggle comes in. And it's like, because I'm thinking about people out there today that, again, if they've never seen somebody who's been through, military physical trauma and harm, it's like, it is kind of like when you first come on and you see, but then you hear your heart. And it's like, there might be people out there today that you've never been through military combat, but man, you were abused as a kid, sexually abused, physically abused, and you could be in the prime of your years of marriage and there's still just this like feeling because of what happened to you as a kid. No one's going to know that looking at you, but like how do you heal? Like these kids and these stories that you're hearing, it's like, man, this is real life that's going to grow up with these kids the rest of their life, and it's like, how do you heal for you in your journey? What was there? You said you were angry. You said, you were, justified. Like, what was the turning point for you? Was it a day? Was it a moment? Was it an interaction? Like, what caused that life script to flip for you where it was like, you know what? I can't be angry anymore. Like, what was that like?
Well, um, so there were so many moments like that little girl. That's a moment in my life that turned a corner. There's so many moments that turned a corner. One part I always point to is I read a book a long time ago, a book by Randy Posh, The Last Lecture, and I recommend it to anybody. It's a very, very simple read. And Randy had pancreatic cancer, and he was going to die. I mean, that was going to happen. He was going to pass away, and it was going to be pretty soon. And he didn't want to write a book, but he knew that he could help people by writing this book. So on he didn't have a lot of free time because he only had so much time left, and he didn't want to spend it writing a book. So he knew that his health was very important to him, to keep him alive as long as he could. So exercising and stuff like that. Well, when you're exercising, you can also write a book. So as he was exercising, he would talk to a ghostwriter and write the book. And there was one part in the book I'll never forget. I actually stopped reading the book when I read this part. I read the book, finished it later, a long time after, but it was this part in the book that just changed me. And it was when he was in his car and he was sitting at a red light, and nobody's around him, and he's just sitting in his car, and a car pulls up next to him. He doesn't notice this car. There's a lady in the car, and she looks over and she sees Randy, and she recognizes him, and she sees what he's doing, and he's singing and he's dancing in his car by himself. And then the light turns green and they go on their way. And then they run into each other a little while later, and she sees him and she says, "Hey, how are you so happy?" And in his head, he's like, "What do you mean? I'm dying. Like, I'm not happy." And she said to him, like, "Oh, well, he didn't say that to her, but that's what what he's thinking." And she said to him, "I saw you in your car the other day at a red light, and you were singing and you were dancing." And he stopped and he thought about it. And he's like, because in that moment, he's putting on a big smile. He looks really happy because that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be really happy for everybody else because it affects their lives in positive ways. But are you truly happy? And when she said that to him, he was like, "Wait a minute. I am happy. Like, I thought I was just putting on this face for everybody else, but I was in my car by myself with nobody else around, and there I was with a smile on my face, singing and dancing." And when I read that part of the book, I realized I was doing the same exact thing. But for a long time, I thought, you know what? I'm just smiling for everybody else. That's all I'm doing. And that's not what I was doing. I was truly happy. So that part of the book it was such a big part of my life. And I actually wrote Randy an email, and I knew, how busy he was. He was voted 100 in the top 100, I think, People Magazine, 100 most influential people of that year, and it was Time Magazine. But he's not going to get back to me, and he wrote back to me just a couple of weeks before he passed away. Like, come on. And you know what? And then I sit there and I look at my emails. Oh, I haven't gotten back to somebody in 7 or 8 months. And what's my excuse? I've got none. If Randy can write back an email to me and he's got a few weeks left to live, and I sit there with my emails that I haven't answered, and some of them 6 months ago, like, come on, Rick, what are you doing? So I just think about that, and I think about how influential he was on my life. And I'll never forget that day that I got that email. I'll never forget that day I read that part of the story. So there's just so many little pieces in my life, so many moments, chance meetings with people, chance things that I've read, chance things that I've seen in my life that have just changed my life. And again, my eyes are open to all those things now. And if they aren't, then again, I'm just blocked by the difficult things that are in front of me. We all deal with difficult things. And we're all dealing with difficult things right now. There's just things in our life that are difficult. And if we are just bombarded by those difficult things, it's hard to see the amazing things that are going on around us. But they're there every single day. Those awesome things are around us as well.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing throughout your story, you called it free will, but it's choice. We all get to choose what we do, and it was a choice that day in that restaurant with that little girl to bridge the gap. But it was also a choice for this gentleman that you just described to write back to you. And you had also talked about, as part of your story, just like, I wonder how many things I've missed. We have a choice to do the right thing, and we don't always know the impact that that can make. If the guy that you wrote to read the message and kind of went and lived his life, there's no harm in that. But the fact that he heard from you and chose to reach back out to you in correspondence probably made such a significant impact on your life. And think about how much stuff you've been through and what you just shared, and how many you're touching the lives of 2 million kids. And this simple gesture from somebody that you admired and reading their story, reaching out to you, probably was one of those moments that was like, man, like, It's crazy. Like he got back to me, that interaction with that girl. And I'm just thinking about all those people out there that like, what are the things that we're just so busy and we're so worn out and we're so extended as parents, as spouses, building businesses or serving our communities, that there's just nothing left to see the good and like do something because we're doing so much and nothing at the same time. And I think it comes back to what you said. We have choices. And so like this was a concept that I was thinking about this past week. And I don't know if this is ever experienced it with your phone or your computer. We ran into a situation at work where one of the systems that we use, there was too many files on it because of the amount of content that we make with videos and MP3s and all of this. Storage ran out. And so we started getting these alerts every single day of like maximum capacity, storage is out. You can't upload anything else because your storage is maxed out at this point. And you have two choices. Like you either go spend all this crazy money and buy a whole brand new software that can hold more storage, or find ways to get rid of things immediately that can free up space. And one is not even attainable at this point. The cost for getting a whole new operating system and that is just like, we're not there. There's not money for that. We're not going to do that. Then it's like, okay, if we got to free up space, like what are we going to get rid of? And you can just start doing stuff, or you can actually like take a step backwards. And in our case, like just look at the files that we had and what we were doing. And what you realize is that because we put a little of intention into it, we noticed that there was files that like we really don't need, or like we can move to another program, which would free up the space that we need to allow the operating system to actually do its job. We're not getting rid of everything. We're just being super strategic about what we're removing or transferring so that we can have a little bit more space for systems to update. And I think sometimes we miss like, man, I wonder how many things in my actual life are out of storage as a dad, as a husband. Like I have so many files that are uploaded right now running simultaneously that I can't update my system, that I can't do good, that I can't have things sync. You know, that's something that happens in tech all the time. Your apps sync to each other. They basically speak to each other. Like, is my life as a dad and a husband synced together, or are those separate compartmentalizations that I do? Like, am I working Steve? Am I married to Steph Steve? Am I dad to my 4 kids Steve? Or are those things all blended together? And so I've been thinking a lot about that in my own faith journey, which is like, man, I can't reboot the entire system, right? Because life is, I still got to get the kids up in the morning. I got to go to work. Like, I can't just clear my calendar for 6 months and do nothing and just like rewire the whole thing. But what are the things right now in my life that I could take a step back, look at, that aren't serving where I'm at right now, and just begin to remove those to allow space to fill in, to recognize what we were just talking about a few minutes ago, for choice, to have the ability to use my free will. If I'm running on empty, or I'm exhausted, or I just am living like another book that like has touched you, Brett Magpiong, who was one of my first guests on the show, wrote this incredible book called The Delta Theorem, and talked about, basically it's a book that helps you become fully alive. And it talks about the fact that like we as people could be living. We got breath in our lungs. You know, we're here on screen together. We're recording a podcast. We're obviously alive, but we're not fully alive. We're just doing things. And so this book really gets to the heart of like, what would make it so, God forbid, pancreatic cancer doesn't make you start the bucket list and like live those last few years of your life? Like, what would it look like now in your 30s and 40s to come fully alive? And every day may not be a great day, but like, how are you doing the things every single day that make this human experience worth living for? And it could just be that like somebody like Rick, my hope as I've been listening to you is like, you are so inspirational, but it's just like everything else as a human. We can be inspired for an hour and cry together and like, Rick, it's so touching. And like, I'm going to make every relationship better and healthier because Rick did it. And then like 3 days from now, it's our kids get in the way, life happens, and we forgot about Rick. Like, I want this to be longer lasting. And so before you and I kind of came on, you know, I said like, Rick, I know when you come on and do these things, like everybody wants to hear your stories of combat and overcoming, your physical situation that you've had to deal with. But I was like, Rick, what are the things you don't get to talk about? Because that's what the focus is, especially with you doing veterans. And one of the things we talked about is like being a dad and like being married. And so even along those ideas of like choices and freeing up space and capacity, like what especially I think is fascinating with you in light of like what you did go through, because it was traumatic. And it was, like we said, it was a defining moment of your life being injured in combat. But now you're a dad. Like it's kind of similar to the conversation I had with Christian Ponder, who is an ex NFL quarterback, first round draft pick, like used to be chased down by 300-pound defensive tackles and was on Sundays. And like when he threw a pick, everybody knew it. And like when he was a success, everybody knew it. And now, like years out of the league, like he's a dad. And so I'm not saying like getting your kids to bed at night is the same as like eluding a defensive tackle. But for like you were in Iraq, you went through what you went through and now you're a dad. Like what has carried over into fatherhood? Like what is different or alarming? Maybe harder, even though it might sound like, man, the military was friggin' hard. But I'm sure that there's parts of like being a dad where you're like, this is actually harder. Like what is that transition been like for you as a dad? Like just recalling life as a father, what's that been like?
Yeah, so being a husband and a father, it's work, and you got to make it work. And just like I went to work and when I was in the army, and you had to make that work. You had to figure out things, and it's so funny. Like there's so many books out there on how to be a parent, and it's like every book is written about how that parent parented their child. And every parenting situation is so different. So like every parent could have their own book. And it's just funny that we read these books and we're like, oh, this is how I'm going to do it with my kid. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's not my kid. My kid's totally different than how that book went. Um, so yeah, there's some really difficult things in being a parent, but there's nothing, in my mind, there's just nothing more rewarding than being a parent either. Like, when I am in schools and the kids ask me, were your kids ever afraid of you? Like that was one thing that I didn't really know how that would work. My daughter Tenley, she came into my life when she was almost 4 years old. She's my stepdaughter, and that's right at that age where they're starting to see people as like their features and stuff like that. And oh my gosh, that doesn't look right. And she never looked at me that way. It was really amazing, and I think it's a lot of it is because of my wife. You know, she just didn't either. And I don't know, she passed that on to Tenley, our daughter. So Tenley was never afraid. And then our daughter Grace, she's been with us forever. And, she sees me as dad and normal. And it's kind of funny because she looks at everybody else's dad and probably thinks they look weird. And obviously that's not how that works. But yeah, being a husband, being a father it's the most rewarding, but it's also the most work. If you don't put your time into it, it doesn't work. Just like anything, if you don't make the most important thing in your life the most important thing, it not doesn't really work that well. So my family is the most important thing, and with my job and traveling and stuff like that, I have to figure out how to make that balance work with being away from home so much and sleeping in hotels. And I'll be in a hotel tonight. Thankfully, it's only one day this week. Usually it's 5 days. So I'm figuring out that balance, and next year might look a little different. So being a husband and being a father is just the most amazing thing. Because honestly, at one point, I just didn't think I'd have either of those. I didn't, this is a tough one for especially guys to talk about. Being lonely. And when I got injured and I looked at myself for the first time, I was like, what's the point of being here? Like, what's the point of being alive? Like, I'm going to get out of this hospital someday, and who's going to give me an opportunity? Who's going to love me? Like, who's going to choose to be with the guy that looks like this? That's a tough one to talk about. It makes people uncomfortable. It used to make me uncomfortable, but I'm comfortable with it now because I know where it ended up. But that's how I felt early on. And then I met Amy, and truly blessed to have met her. But that's also the power of hope. Hold on, possibilities exist. It's not just a nice saying. It's true. You hold on long enough, possibilities exist. And I don't think I was even buying that part of it. I didn't think I would meet somebody that would choose to be with me forever. And then I met Amy. So HOPE, hold on, possibilities exist, is extremely, extremely real. And then I had my girls, and again, I said that earlier. I wouldn't have them if this didn't happen to me. So how can I look back and say it was the worst thing? It ruined my life. It certainly didn't ruin my life. It actually made my life a lot better.
Well, and I don't know if you always get the chance to talk about Amy. It'd be fun. Like when, so you were out of the hospital, you were on the road to recovery and healing. Like where did you actually end up meeting Amy?
Yeah, so I met Amy through a mutual friend named Matt Chacom, and
Appreciate you, Matt.
some yeah, and if some people are listening right now, they caught that a little bit. Steve didn't catch it quite yet, but I actually met her through a website called Match.com.
Oh, you got
Ah,
me.
Matt Chacom. That's so. One of my friends met her husband that way, and she's like, "Yeah, I always just tell people I met her through a mutual friend named Matt Chacom. It always sounds better when you meet him through a mutual
It does
friend."
sound good.
Yeah. So I met her on Match, and I always tell people I dated the same way on Match that I dated in high school, which means I would never ask anyone out. Like I'm just a big baby. That's just what I am. And also, I'm not going to reach out to somebody and then have them be like, "This guy's reaching out to me." So I just didn't do that. People would reach out to me, and a lot of times it was like, "Thank you for your service." That's how it would start off. Yeah, I don't know. That's not really how we wanted to start off a relationship with somebody. So Amy just came into it. She didn't know my story, which was also really amazing. Like she saw my picture, had no clue what happened to me, and still wanted to get to know me. Like that's amazing to me. So I always tell people she was wearing a New York Giants hooded sweatshirt in one of her pictures, and I married her the next day. And then people are like, "What?" I'm like, "No, I'm kidding. That would be super creepy if that's how it worked." But a year and a half later, we ended up getting married.
Well, to give encouragement, because as I said, we got people from all walks of life in their 30s and 40s. We do have people that listen to the show that I know personally that are single. And so whenever guests talk about things, I don't just want to move on to the next topic. I mean, were you on Match for a long time before Amy came across? Like, because I'm just worrying about the person who's out there who feels forgotten, who feels left out, who feels like, is this what this season of life is always going to be like? And it takes work. Parenting takes work. Marriage takes work. Being a human takes work. Sometimes it's about, like just like that day in September, that you didn't know that the IED was going to hit your car. Like we don't ever know what today is going to hold. And I wonder on, how much people are operating in hopelessness, feeling like they're never going to whatever fill in the blank in your life right now. Like, what was that process like for you putting yourself out there? Like how long did that take? Or was Amy like an instant, like, that's my guy, I want to go be with him? Like how long was that process like for you?
I think I was on for a couple of months. And, like I actually got way more interest than I thought I would. But again, it started with conversations. Like they knew my story already. They knew who I was. They saw me in the newspaper. They saw me on the news, or I was in their kid's school or something like that. And it was like, "Thank you for your service," is how it would start off. And that's great. And I appreciate that. But that's not where I really wanted to start a
Sure.
relationship. Yeah, so but it was within a couple of months. But I mean, it was 10 years after my injury. So even though I wasn't on Match, I was still looking for companionship before that, and I just wasn't finding it. And but that's the thing, like timing. We don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but I know that it will happen. Like certain thing, not I know not everything. Like I think about if it's an attainable goal or not. Like I want to play in the NFL. Well, guess what, Rick? You're not going to be an NFL football player. That's just not how it works. But if it's an attainable goal and you are patient enough, those things will happen. If you work hard enough, those things will happen for you. So I felt like the timing was right 7 years earlier before I met Amy, but that's not how that works. That's why it's timing. And it wasn't my timing. In my mind, it's God's timing. If I met somebody that much earlier, I didn't meet Amy, and I don't have my two daughters. Like, that's crazy. So sometimes that timing word is a tough one.
Well, and that's a reflection that I do quite a bit because whether it's, things in my life that I wish were different now today, it's easy to complain or, wish things were different. One of the things in my life that I've spoke about quite a bit with my wife is I came out of school with a ton of student debt. Even though I was a college lacrosse player, parents, when I was going to school, my two older brothers had not been to a 4-year university. And so FAFSA, student aid, like this was kind of around early 2000s where it wasn't really a worldwide like pandemic of student loans. Like you took out a student loan, like that's what you did. So I did. And I went to a great school, but I came out with all the student debt and I've been paying it back since and we're working our way through it. And sometimes I just get really frustrated that I have to keep paying this thing back. But in reality, it's like, man, it's kind of like the butterfly effect with Ashton Kutcher. If I never went to school when I did, the timing of it, I would have never come back home, met Stephanie. We would never have our 4 beautiful children. So as much as it's like, yeah, that's a pain point in my life, if I actually will track backwards, it's like, but look what all has come through it. And I think that's what's resonating with your story today, which is, listener, no matter where you are today, no matter if it's physical pain, if it's setback, if it's marriage, if it's divorce, if it's loneliness, if it's not having the ability to have children, maybe you did have children and they're just not obedient, like whatever you had abusive parents, you're the best parent, like whatever your things are, like what good though has come from it in really spending the time, whether it's meditation, whether it's in prayer, to write down, like, man, all these things have happened because of this thing. And so rather than like for me, one thing to like check my heart is, God, before I ever ask God for another thing or an unanswered prayer, it's like first take accountability for, the things that have happened in your life. And one of the things that you shared in your story, and I'm curious to this, I've never been to Iraq. How normal is it to have a canal on the side of the road?
Well, they're actually quite they're everywhere. They
Okay,
really
well,
are.
Rick, you
And
just
actually,
you just ruined the story. I was hoping you were
I
going to
did
say
ruin it
there
though.
was none, and it was just where do
Listen,
we go from here, Rick?
Steve, listen to this one. So, yes, they're everywhere. But the one that I rolled into was so disgustingly filthy that it actually almost killed me. It almost took my life. I ended up in the hospital with fungus on my hands called aspergillus, and it's extremely deadly. And if it passed my hands, it would have killed me. They almost amputated my hands because of it. Um, but that also gives me a reason to be grateful for my hands. Like most people would look at my hands and say, "How could he say he's lucky to have those?" Well, I almost didn't have them, and I use them a lot. I hold a microphone in a presentation. I drive a car with these hands. I hold my drinks with my. I do everything with them. So I'm lucky to have them. Like again, but it goes back to what you're saying. Like finding something good that even I rolled. I could just look at that and be like, "Wow, I rolled into a canal and it almost killed me. I wish the water was clean." Well, that's not going to help me at all. But now I can see that how lucky I am to have the things that I have. I almost lost my hands, but that water saved my life. And thinking about Iraq and being lucky and about that water, that's the same water that the people over there were drinking. That's what they had to drink. And I think most people I would ask over there, they would say they're lucky to have that water, and it's water that almost killed me. Now, sure, certainly it's not what they want. I don't want hands like this, but these are the hands that I have. And when, I'm sure they've worked hard to maybe get better water. So, but I would also say they feel lucky to have the water that they have. I just recognize that with all the things in my life today, how lucky I am to have what I have. I don't concentrate a whole lot on what I don't have. I concentrate more on what I actually do have and how lucky I am to have it. And that doesn't mean, I'm a human being, so we desire things. But when I desire something, when I want something, I think about what I already have, how lucky I am to have it. And then, you know what? If I still want to desire that thing, that's fine. That's fine. But then you got to work for it. And that I do understand. But yeah, I mean, yeah, there's canals all over the place over there, but this one happened to be filthy. And I don't know. I just think that all these things, they shaped me in a much better way than most people would look at them. Like, I'm stronger today because of all that stuff that I went through. If that water was clean, I wouldn't have I wouldn't have as much mental toughness as I have right now. That's just the way it is. That's 100% fact. I wouldn't be as mentally strong right now if I didn't. So I think about that stuff all the time, Steve.
Well, and you're such a inspiration, very much like Holly Francis, who I had on a couple episodes ago, as we talked about. She is a rare disease survivor of Guillain-Barré syndrome, and again, as a host who's never been in another person's shoes, you are kind of sensitive to like, don't say the wrong thing, don't offend them. But she kept saying it that I knew I had permission to ask her, which was Holly. There's it sounds like there's more silver lining blessings through what you went through. Like, I'm not going to tell you that, but that's what I keep hearing from you, Holly, is that you're talking about all these things that you now have the capacity to do that had you not go through Guillain-Barré syndrome, which she's kind of now become one of the lead spokespeople for it. And she's connecting with people from all over the world who are told you have a rare disease, and very few people, like the numbers, like less than so many people have this around the world. You feel like a freak. You feel like I'm the only one that's ever gone through it. And then you get all those people in a room together and you have community all of a sudden. And it's like, wow, in the daily grind of what I live, like, yeah, there's not a lot of people that look like me, but I'm inspiration for, what she's doing now. And when I had her on my show, I was like, man, I don't want to just talk about Guillain-Barré and what you went through. Like, what are you doing now? And she's doing fitness. She's doing training, and she's so inspirational to, again, a group of people that are looking for somebody who's gone through what they've gone through and is out on the other side. And, when you have podcasts, I think one of the delicate balances I always strike is it would be super easy to go find the most influential, good looking, rich, wealthy, successful business people and bring them on. But if you're in a place in your life where you feel lesser than, and there's a comparison trap that constantly exists for you, whether you're single looking at all the married people and feeling like I'll never have that, or you're looking at what looks like the perfect family on Instagram or Facebook and your family's an absolute mess. Like, we can very easily all fall into this trap of like, I wish I was like so and so, or if I just had what they had. But yet, like you talked about, like it's taking ownership of the good that has had, like not acknowledging what we would call the bad things or the setbacks. And I think maybe that's where, when you talk about mental health and breakthrough, like, we don't want to create victims where like you have every right to stay where you are because of what happened to you. Like, that is true, but that doesn't allow you to be a jerk. That doesn't allow you to, because this happened to me, abuse or disfigurement or rare disease, like I have the right to, like, you guys, you and Holly are more inspirational to me than the successful business owner, because again, it doesn't mean every day is perfect, but it's, you guys have not allowed these things that have happened to you that you did not ask for to become your defining moment for who you are in life. And that's just the way it is. Like, you've reached so many kids. And I think, as I was thinking about this again, because most of the listeners of this show, when you look at demographic and statistics of listeners, fall in that 30 to 40 range. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, do you also speak to businesses and corporations?
Yes, we do.
Like,
Yep.
is it almost harder to speak to adults that have kind of figured life out versus a child who's like, is that a monster? Oh, I actually like him, and like, I'll listen to him, versus like you go into businesses. Is it harder to get people our age and older to acknowledge their brokenness and acknowledge that they don't have it figured out, and to really like set them free? Like, what has that experience been like for you?
Yeah, I don't know if it's harder to talk to them, because I think, you know, I almost give the same message that I would give a kindergartner. Obviously, it's worded extremely different, but it's the same talk of hope. And like, when you talk about hope and hopelessness, every person has dealt with both sides of that at some point in their life. And I'm not talking like, hopelessness doesn't have to be like a life and death situation. Just giving up on something that you've loved doing, that's losing hope in that situation. Like, everybody has felt that in their life at some point. So I think with the message that I give when I give it to older adults, businesses, and stuff like that, it still fits extremely well. And I think it is. I think the people that are listening really do clue in on that. Like, they understand that they're dealing with difficult things in their life. I'm not trying, because I tell them I'm not comparing like what I'm going through to what you're going through. Like, that's not the goal. It's just the fact that we are dealing with difficult things in our life, and you can find good things that come out of those things. But you have to change how you're looking at it. That's what you have to do. Your perspective on it has to change. And that's not always easy. But yeah, so talking to kids, obviously, talking to elementary school kids is my favorite. That's just the best. And then middle schoolers are great. You know, their filter is a little different than the elementary. And then high school, they turn their filter totally on, and they won't. You know, they don't engage as much. And then adults, they engage extremely well. Yeah, they're just, and you know, one thing I learned early on in my speaking career was, early on being my first speaking engagement ever. At the beginning, it almost didn't matter what I said. People were listening because of the way I look, because of the story that I have. Um, that's when I realized that if people were going to listen, if people are going to listen to you, find a way to help them. Like, if you have a stage, you better figure out a way to help other people. And in that process, you're going to help yourself as well. That's rewarding. Like, you know, you mentioned earlier about serving people, and you know, you're just, there's no more bandwidth. Like, you do too much for other people. Well, the payment of service, the payment of serving other people is that good feeling. So if you're doing a service for people and you're just not getting it and you feel overwhelmed, you're doing too much, you just got to change the service. You got to find some way, some other way to serve, because that is the payment of serving. It's that good feeling, knowing that you're helping other people. So that's just something I realized. Like, thank you for your service. You hear that all the time as a service member, and I appreciate that very much. But I'm not done. I'm going to continue to serve the rest of my life. That'll give you the most meaning in your life, is when you choose to serve. So that's another thing that I talk a lot about with adults.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to give you some time here because I know I try to tell my guests we keep it to about an hour so you can start thinking about your start, stop, continue. For those that are new to the One Big Thing podcast, because you're here to champion Rick, again, welcome. Hope that's your last stop. I always finish these shows asking each guest one thing they want to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing. So, Rick, you can start thinking about that. But I think about all the people out there today that are struggling navigating the different roles, responsibility, relationships, community, and kids are almost easier because I think about as a parent the parentisms that we share with our kids that we just don't even believe for ourselves. You know, when your kids, when you make them a meal and they don't want it, you're like, hey, be grateful. You know, and then things happen to us as adults, and we're, you know, it's whether it's God, whether it's faith, whether it's whatever, you know, like, hey, you should be grateful. We're like, I don't want to be. And so like, I just think one of my focuses is, rather than for me trying to tell other people how to live, how can I live the most meaningful life for myself personally, where I'm the first person I'm working on before I ever tell another person. And so I think with you, if I work on myself first, but I acknowledge your difference, I don't hide from it, but I find a way to come alongside you, to champion you, to help make your life better, then I think that's what this human experience is all about. Not shying away from what makes us different, the color of our skin or whatever we politically, but just like acknowledging, not as like that's who you are, but acknowledging what makes us all different. And I think if we can learn how to work on ourselves first and foremost, you know, get rid of our stinking thinking, count our blessings, find the good, find ways to get better. Like we talked about in this episode, like eliminating the capacity storage issue that we're all dealing with. Then how can we begin to bridge the gap and recognize and celebrate other people that have gone through things, not from a place of, you know, I will never understand what it's like to live a day in your life. But man, I can sure champion you and help share your story and just be a friend whenever you need me and you're not on stage. And, you know, everyone wants the story that you have to share. Like, what's Rick when the mic's not on? Like, what is Rick struggling with as a dad and as a human being and as a parent? Like, that's my heart. That's where I want to help people. So I want to champion you and celebrate you for coming on. Because again, my hope is that for anybody listening, this isn't an hour where you feel so inspired and 3 days from now it's gone. Take what Rick shared, is that you have a choice. You have free will. You have the ability to not allow the things that have happened to you, which is very real. Don't not acknowledge that and don't brush it under the rug. Bring it to the surface and say, this happened to me. My vehicle was hit with an IED, but it's what I've done with it, which is now the celebration of my life. I have not allowed that thing to hold me in this holding room capacity where just everybody feels bad for me. And I am, like you said, like I'm a monster to other people. You are light in life to other people because of who you are. And I want to celebrate that because there's just so many people that are stuck in hopelessness. And that message of hope is so palpable. So, again, I hope that if Rick's story has resonated with you, go back and listen to other episodes. I think I've been blessed to have some incredible human beings that I just get the honor and privilege of spending an hour with together. But as I said, one of the ways that, again, if you don't identify with Rick's story, I don't blame you. But maybe in these start, stop, continues, this has just been a fun way to kind of hear what people are trying to work on. So, how we're going to do it, Rick is going to share a statement of one thing I want to start doing, one thing I want to stop doing, and one thing I want to continue doing. So, Rick, take it away, and then I'll bring it home for us.
All right, one thing I need to start doing, not just want, this is a need. I need to start getting control of my health. I need to start exercising. I need to start eating healthy. And I know these are needs that I've always needed to do, but it's definitely one of my biggest struggles in this world is my health. And it's not the health that I can't control. Like pancreatic cancer, that's something that's not in your control a lot of the times. But this is something I can control, and it bothers me that I have very little control over it. That's just me. I'm not putting my mind in the right place. So I need to start exercising. I need to get my health under control. I need to stop being impatient. I need to stop being impatient. Patience, I talked about it earlier. Hold on, possibilities exist. HO, hold on. That's being patient. And we're in the world of instant gratification. We need that right away. We need to feel that good feeling right away. And sometimes that's the timing thing. The time when the timing's right, it will happen. So I gotta stop being impatient. And then what I need to continue doing is spreading my message. And I want to reach everybody in the world. Obviously, that's a big goal, and I don't know if that's the goal I have written on my mirror, but I mean, that would be the goal. I want to reach as many people as possible that want to hear this message, and if they're struggling through something, I want to be able to help them. So I want to continue spreading my message, and I want to continue helping people. That's my service in this world today, and that's what makes me feel good because I know I can help other people.
Well, Rick, I want to tell you, partner, I think you are such an inspiration to me personally. It doesn't. I think what makes you a hero is yes, what you went through and how you've championed that, but it's the simple fact that you just keep showing up. Right? Every battle in life is not going to be won, but it's do you keep showing up? Do you keep giving your best? And even in this hour that we've spent together, you continue to give your best and you continue to let your light shine. And I think that is something that whether they know you or not will hopefully inspire somebody. And I love some of the start stop continues that you just shared, but I hope that your message today can help somebody who, again, may not resonate, but is like, man, I got to work on my health. If that is the thing that like brought you together with Rick, is like, man, we both got to work on this thing together. Don't stop being you. Just keep letting that light shine. We will put in the show notes once this episode is released, ways to get in contact. I normally record, so this isn't going to come out on your actual birthday, but I am also honored that you would even carve out some time today on your birthday. That when this gets released, we're going to wish everybody a belated birthday to Rick Yarosh. But thanks for using an important day in your life to hopefully be a seed that's planted that can change another person's life. And I think whether you stumble upon this podcast because you found it, whether a friend recommended it, whether you knew Rick, or again, you've been a friend of mine for a long time, you were meant to listen to this episode. And you and I talked about timing quite a bit. Nothing happens by chance. And so my prayer is that you not only listen to this episode, but when you get done with it, you actually will take some time to think about what was it from that episode that I need to start implementing in my life? Was there